On a cold winter night in Chicago, billionaire CEO Alexander Kane was on his way home when fate stopped him in his tracks. Inside a quiet airport terminal, he found two little girls, one sick with fever, the other trying to protect her sister from the cold. He didn't know their names, their story, or how they ended up there. But something in their eyes touched a place in his heart he'd long forgotten. That night, the man who had everything chose to become their guardian. He rushed them to the hospital, stayed by their side for days, and helped them find the family they'd lost. In helping those two girls, Alexander discovered something no amount of wealth could ever buy: the true meaning of love and humanity. A touching USA-based story of hope, kindness, and second chances. It was late at night in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The last few flights had already departed, leaving the long corridors almost empty. The sound of a cleaning machine echoed faintly in the distance. Under one of the large windows near Gate 17, two little girls lay curled up together, wrapped in an old blanket. The elder one, around 7, had her arms protectively around her younger sister, who couldn't be more than 4. Their faces were pale, their hair messy, and their small shoes were worn to the soles. They looked like they had been there for days. A tall man in a charcoal gray coat walked briskly through the terminal, scrolling through his phone. His name was Alexander Kane, the world's youngest trillionaire and the powerful CEO of Kane Industries. He had just returned from a global economic summit in Switzerland, where he was praised for his ruthless efficiency and business intelligence. To the world, Alexander was a symbol of success, a man who conquered every market, every deal. But behind that perfectly tailored suit was a man who had forgotten what kindness even felt like. He stopped for a moment to answer a call from his assistant, discussing an early morning meeting in New York. But as he turned toward the window, he saw something that made him pause. Two small figures, barely visible under the dim airport lights, were huddled together on the metal bench. He frowned. He wasn't used to seeing such sights in first-class lounges or private terminals. Slowly, curiosity replaced irritation. He walked closer, each step echoing softly on the polished floor. As he approached, he noticed the younger girl's hand twitching weakly. Her skin looked flushed. The older sister whispered something in her ear, but the little one didn't respond. Alexander bent slightly and saw the girl's cheeks, red with fever. His heart sank for reasons he couldn't understand. He glanced around, expecting to see a parent nearby, but there was no one. The food court was closed, the lights were dim, and the few security guards were far away, chatting near the escalator. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle them. "Hey there," he said softly, his deep voice carrying warmth he rarely used. The older girl stirred, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. Her hair was tangled, and she looked frightened. "It's okay," he said again. "Where are your parents?" For a moment she didn't speak. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Mom said she'll come back soon. She went to find food." Alexander's jaw tightened. That answer hit him harder than he expected. The girl's name was Emily. Her sister's name, she said, was Sophie. They had been waiting at the airport for 2 days. Their mother had lost her job and their home, so they had nowhere else to go. She'd promised to come back after finding something to eat, but hours turned into days, and no one returned. Emily had tried to stay strong for her sister, sharing half a chocolate bar someone had dropped near the vending machine. But now Sophie had developed a fever. Emily didn't know what to do. She just kept praying. Alexander stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the two tiny figures before him. He could buy skyscrapers, countries, even entire corporations. But he didn't know how to comfort a crying child. His assistant's voice came through the phone again, asking if he wanted his private jet ready. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched beside the bench, looking into Emily's frightened eyes. "You must be hungry," he said quietly. She nodded, clutching her teddy bear tightly. "Okay," he whispered, glancing around. "Wait here. I'll be right back." He walked toward the small 24-hour cafe down the hall, his mind racing. The billionaire who could negotiate billion-dollar deals suddenly felt nervous about ordering warm milk and sandwiches. When he returned, Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. She hadn't seen food in 2 days. She carefully lifted Sophie's head and tried to wake her, but Sophie's breathing was shallow, her forehead burning hot. Panic filled Emily's eyes. "She's really sick," she cried softly. "She needs my mom." The helplessness in her voice pierced Alexander's heart in a way no business loss ever had. Without hesitation, he took off his expensive coat and wrapped it around Sophie. "We're taking her to a hospital," he said firmly. Emily's eyes filled with fear. "But what if Mom comes back and doesn't find us?" she whispered. Alexander paused for a moment. He knelt down to her level and said gently, "If she comes back, I'll make sure she finds you. I promise." There was something about the way he said it that made Emily nod, even though she didn't know who this man was. Maybe it was the calmness in his voice, or maybe it was hope, something she hadn't felt in days. He lifted Sophie in his arms carefully. She was light as air, her skin hot against his chest. Emily followed closely, holding her teddy bear and a small backpack that looked nearly empty. The guards at the terminal looked surprised when they saw Alexander Kane, one of the most powerful men in the world, walking quickly through the airport carrying a sick child. But he didn't stop. For once, he didn't care about cameras or reputation or headlines. He only cared about the little girl burning up in his arms. Outside, the freezing winter air hit him like ice. Snowflakes danced under the airport lights as he opened the back door of his limousine. "Rush to the nearest children's hospital," he ordered his driver. Emily sat beside him, clutching her sister's hand. As the car moved, she kept whispering, "You'll be okay, Sophie. You'll be okay." Alexander stared at them silently, his mind replaying her words about their mother, the one who went to find food and never came back. He felt a strange ache in his chest, something he hadn't felt since his own childhood. When they reached the hospital, doctors rushed to take Sophie inside. Emily refused to let go until Alexander promised he would stay. Hours passed in the waiting area. The billionaire sat on a hard plastic chair, watching Emily sleep beside him, her small head resting on his arm. His phone buzzed constantly, missed calls, business updates, meetings, but he ignored them all. He realized how empty his world had been, filled with contracts, investments, and numbers, but no warmth, no heart, no humanity. Around 3 a.m., a doctor approached. "She had a high fever," he said. "Severe dehydration and infection. If you hadn't brought her in tonight, she might not have made it till morning." Alexander's throat tightened. He turned to Emily, who was still half asleep. He gently brushed her hair back and whispered, "She's going to be okay." For the first time in years, those words meant more to him than any success he'd ever achieved. As dawn began to break over Chicago, Alexander walked to the hospital window. Snow covered the streets, glowing under the first light of morning. For years he had believed money could fix anything. But tonight, he learned that sometimes, the simplest act, staying, caring, helping, meant more than all the wealth in the world. Behind him, Sophie stirred slightly in her hospital bed, her fever finally breaking. Alexander turned back and saw Emily watching him quietly. "Are you really going to help us?" she asked softly. He nodded, his voice gentle. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Emily smiled weakly and closed her eyes again. That moment, something inside Alexander Kane, the man known as the coldest CEO in America, began to change. He didn't know it yet, but his life, his purpose, and his heart would never be the same again. He sat down beside the girls, adjusting his coat over them as they slept. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. The endless meetings, deals, and wealth suddenly seemed meaningless compared to this quiet moment of compassion. As the morning sun poured through the hospital window, Alexander whispered softly to himself, "Maybe this is what I was meant to find. Not success, but humanity." The next morning, Alexander Kane woke up in the hospital room, sitting awkwardly on a chair beside the two little girls. Emily was still asleep, holding her sister's tiny hand tightly. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across their faces. Sophie's fever had dropped slightly during the night, but she remained weak and pale. Alexander rubbed his eyes, unsure how long he had been there. For the first time in years, he had missed an entire night of business calls. And surprisingly, he didn't care. Something about this place, about these children, kept him grounded. When the doctor came in, Alexander immediately stood up. "She's stable for now," the doctor said, checking Sophie's chart. "But she'll need rest, good food, and care for several weeks. Do you know their guardian or family?" Alexander hesitated. "Their mother left them," he finally said quietly. "I don't think she's coming back." The doctor looked at him with concern. "Then someone will need to take responsibility for them. The state can't just let them go." The words hit Alexander with an unexpected force. Responsibility. It was a word he understood in business, not in life. Emily woke up soon after, blinking at the bright room. When she saw Sophie hooked up to wires and a monitor, her eyes filled with tears. "Is she okay?" she whispered fearfully. Alexander knelt beside her and said softly, "Yes, she's safe now. The doctors are helping her get better." Emily nodded slowly, her small face serious beyond her years. She sat quietly beside her sister, whispering stories to her about the toy bear and how brave she had been. Watching her broke something inside Alexander. This was a child forced to grow up far too soon. A nurse came in with breakfast trays, cereal, fruit, and warm milk. Emily stared at the food as if she didn't believe it was real. "You can eat," Alexander said gently. "It's for you." She hesitated, then began eating slowly, glancing up between bites as if afraid someone would take it away. He noticed the way her small hands trembled, not from cold, but from hunger and habit. That image etched itself deeply in his mind. Two little girls who had learned to survive alone, waiting for someone who would never return. Later that day, while Sophie slept, Alexander stepped outside the room to take a call from his assistant. "Sir, the board meeting has been delayed," she said. "You're needed in New York by tonight." He paused before answering. "Cancel it," he said finally, "and tell the board I'll be unavailable for a few days." There was silence on the line. His assistant hesitated, then said, "Is everything all right, Mr. Kane?" Alexander looked through the glass wall at Emily sitting by her sister's bed, humming softly. "No," he whispered, "but maybe it will be." Hours passed, and the hospital felt strangely peaceful. Alexander found himself talking with Emily more, learning about their life before the airport. She told him about their mother, a waitress who had lost her job after the restaurant closed. Their father had left years ago. They'd moved from motel to motel trying to survive. Then one day, their mother told them they were going to the airport to see airplanes and dream big. She had kissed them, told them to wait, and walked away. She never came back. Emily didn't cry when she said it. She had already run out of tears. When Sophie woke up that evening, her eyes fluttered open slowly. "Where are we?" she murmured weakly. "In the hospital," Emily said softly. "You're okay now?" Sophie looked at Alexander and blinked. "Are you an angel?" she asked faintly. He smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart," he said. "Just someone who found you." Emily reached for his hand then, and for a reason he couldn't explain, he held it. Her small, fragile fingers wrapped around his, and in that moment he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Connection. That night, as the girls slept peacefully, Alexander sat by the window of the hospital corridor, staring out at the city lights. The view reminded him of the countless nights he had spent in skyscrapers, closing deals worth billions, but none of those nights had ever felt this heavy or this real. He thought of his own childhood, of the small apartment in Detroit where his mother had worked 2 jobs after his father died. She had always said, "Don't just build wealth, Alex. Build worth." He had forgotten those words long ago, buried under success and numbers. By morning, he made a decision. When the doctor came to check on Sophie, Alexander asked quietly, "If someone wanted to take care of these children, what would it take?" The doctor looked surprised. "Are you a relative?" he asked. Alexander shook his head. "No, but I can be whatever they need me to be." The doctor smiled faintly and said, "Then it will take some paperwork and time. But if you're serious, you can apply for temporary guardianship." Alexander nodded. For once, the billionaire wasn't thinking about profit, only purpose. He called his legal team that afternoon, giving them instructions that shocked everyone. "I want full custody of 2 minors," he said simply. "Find their mother if you can, but if not, I'll take responsibility." The lawyers asked a dozen questions, Motives, legal risk, media attention, but he cut them off. "Just make it happen," he said firmly. He returned to the hospital with flowers and a small stuffed bear for Sophie. When he entered the room, the girls' faces lit up with smiles that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Over the next few days, he stayed with them constantly. He helped Emily learn to read a few new words from a children's book he bought. He learned how Sophie liked her apple slices cut into tiny moons. Nurses whispered in amazement at how different Alexander Kane looked, not like a CEO, but like a father. His expensive suits were replaced by simple sweaters. His cold expression had softened. He even laughed once, really laughed, when Sophie tried to teach him how to draw a rainbow. The man who once chased power now found peace in crayon lines and children's laughter. When the paperwork finally came through, Alexander signed it without hesitation. "From today," the social worker said, "you are officially their legal guardian." He looked at Emily and Sophie, who were sitting on the hospital bed holding hands. "Does that mean we can go home?" Emily asked. Alexander smiled gently. "Yes," he said. "Home." The word felt new and beautiful on his tongue, something he hadn't said with meaning in years. As they left the hospital, the nurses and doctors waved goodbye. The little family that had formed by accident was walking toward a new beginning. That night, back at his penthouse in downtown Chicago, Alexander showed them their new rooms. Toys, books, and stuffed animals filled the space, yet the girls still clung to him. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." Emily looked around and whispered, "It's too big." He smiled. "It'll feel smaller when it's filled with love." Sophie giggled and ran to the window, pressing her hand against the glass to watch the city lights. For the first time in years, Alexander's home felt alive, not with luxury, but with laughter. As he tucked them into bed that night, Emily whispered, "Do you think Mom will come back?" Alexander hesitated, then brushed her hair gently. "Maybe," he said softly, "but until then I'll be right here." She nodded sleepily and hugged her teddy bear. When the girls finally fell asleep, Alexander stood silently by their door, feeling something he couldn't describe: peace, purpose, and maybe redemption. He realized he had spent his entire life chasing numbers, but it took 2 lost little girls to remind him what truly mattered: kindness. Outside, snow began to fall again over the city. Alexander stepped out onto his balcony, breathing in the cold air. The world below glimmered with lights and life. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he had changed forever. The man who once built empires now wanted to build hope. And though the night was cold, his heart was finally warm. Weeks passed, and winter slowly loosened its grip over Chicago. In the Kane penthouse, laughter began to replace silence. The once empty halls that echoed with only the sound of footsteps now carried the giggles of 2 little girls. Alexander found himself waking early each morning, not for conference calls, but to make pancakes, though he often burned them. Emily loved hers with too much syrup, and Sophie demanded hers shaped like hearts. The great Alexander Kane, the man once feared in boardrooms, now stood in a kitchen covered in flour, smiling wider than he had in years. One morning, as the city glowed under a soft sunrise, Alexander sat by the window reading to the girls. Emily leaned against his shoulder while Sophie played with her bear. "Are you going to work today?" Emily asked. He paused. For years that question had been automatic. Of course, he worked every day. But now, he thought differently. "Maybe later," he said softly. "Right now, I want to be here." Emily smiled, satisfied with that answer. For her, he wasn't a trillionaire or a CEO. He was simply Mr. Alex, the man who kept his promises. At the office, things had changed too. His employees were surprised to see their boss showing a new kind of patience, greeting them with warmth. He no longer demanded perfection from everyone. Instead, he began a company-wide project called the Angel Promise Foundation, a program designed to provide homes, education, and medical care for abandoned and homeless children across the United States. What had started as one act of kindness in an airport had become a movement. Reporters soon heard about it, and within days the story spread across every news outlet. Trillionaire CEO adopts 2 homeless girls found at airport, the headlines read. The world was stunned. Social media exploded with messages of admiration and disbelief. Some called it charity, others a publicity stunt. But Alexander didn't care what the world thought. He cared only about the 2 little girls who now called him family. He stopped attending lavish galas and investor dinners. Instead, He spent his evenings building Lego castles with Emily and Sophie, who declared that their toy bear was the queen of the house. One evening, while watching them draw at the table, Alexander's phone buzzed. It was a call from a social worker in another state. "Mr. Kane," she said gently, "we believe we've located the girl's mother." He froze, heart tightening. "Where?" he asked. "In Detroit," she replied. "She's in a women's shelter. She's been searching for her daughters for weeks." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. He looked at the girls, laughing softly as they argued over crayons. He had promised Emily her mother would find her again. Now that moment had come, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. The next day, Alexander packed a small bag and drove to Detroit with the girls. Emily recognized the city. It was where they had once lived before everything fell apart. When they arrived at the shelter, a woman stepped forward, thin and tired, her eyes filled with tears. "Emily, Sophie?" she whispered. The girls froze for a moment, then ran toward her. The reunion was quiet but powerful. The mother dropped to her knees, clutching them tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. Even Alexander, who had faced world leaders without flinching, felt his throat tighten. "I thought I lost you forever," the woman cried. "I tried to come back, but I was sick. I had nothing." Emily hugged her, whispering, "It's okay, Mom. Mr. Alex took care of us." The mother looked up at him with trembling lips. "You're the one from the news," she said softly. He nodded. "They were alone. I couldn't leave them." She lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I don't deserve them," she said, her voice breaking. "You gave them more than I ever could." Alexander shook his head gently. "You're their mother. That will always mean more." The following weeks were difficult. The court had to decide whether the girls should stay with Alexander or return to their mother. He attended every hearing, never once raising his voice or arguing. Deep down, he knew the truth. No matter how much he loved them, they deserved to know where they came from. When the judge finally ruled that the mother could regain custody under supervision, Alexander smiled, though his heart felt heavy. Emily hugged him tightly, whispering, "Will we still see you?" He bent down and said softly, "Always. You can call me anytime, day or night." When the girls left for Detroit, the penthouse felt unbearably quiet. Their toys still scattered across the floor, their laughter echoing faintly in his memory. He walked through the room slowly, touching the small things they had left behind. Sophie's drawings on the fridge, Emily's favorite storybook on the couch. For a long time he sat by the window, staring at the city lights. Success suddenly felt meaningless again, but this time it wasn't emptiness. It was gratitude. He had found something beautiful and let it go with love, and that made all the difference. Months passed. The Angel Promise Foundation grew into a national organization. Thousands of children received shelter, education, and hope. Alexander rarely appeared in the media anymore, but his actions spoke louder than any press release. Every Christmas he visited hospitals and shelters quietly, without cameras, delivering gifts with his own hands. He kept one special promise too. Every year he sent Emily and Sophie letters, drawings and stories signed simply, "With love, Mr. Alex." The girls would always write back, their words full of warmth and childish spelling. One snowy December evening, 3 years later, Alexander returned to Chicago's O'Hare Airport, the very place where it had all begun. The terminal was busy again, filled with travelers rushing to their flights. He stood by Gate 17 holding a small teddy bear. The bench where the girls had once slept was still there. He placed the bear gently on the seat, whispering, "Thank you for changing me." For a moment, he closed his eyes, remembering that cold night, the fear in Emily's voice, and the fragile warmth of Sophie's tiny hand. When he opened his eyes, he saw a young woman nearby holding a child and smiling softly at him. She must have seen what he did. "Is that for someone?" she asked kindly. He nodded. "For two little angels who once needed a home," he said. She smiled and replied, "Then you must have been their miracle." He looked away, blinking back tears. "No," he whispered, "they were mine." As he walked away, snow began to fall again, covering the bench like a blanket, as if the universe itself was tucking the memory to sleep. Later that night, back in his office, Alexander looked at an old photograph. Emily, Sophie, and him, all smiling with frosting on their faces after a failed cupcake experiment. He placed the photo beside a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for being our angel." He smiled quietly, The man who once ruled industries now ruled hearts. He finally understood that the true measure of success wasn't wealth or fame, but the lives you touch when no one is watching. And in that understanding, he found peace that no amount of money could ever buy. As the lights of the city glittered below, Alexander whispered a silent promise that he would never stop helping children like Emily and Sophie, because every lost soul deserved a second chance. And though he was one of the richest men in the world, he knew his greatest fortune lay not in his bank accounts, but in two small smiles that had once called him Mr. Alex. In the quiet of the night, he felt their love like a heartbeat, steady, eternal, and pure. And for the first time, he truly felt home.